A poor waitress looks one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast dead in the eye and says, "Shout at me again and I'll end you." His men reach inside their jackets. The entire diner goes silent. But the man doesn't hurt her. He lets go. And then he comes back. Night after night, he sits in her section, watching her. What she doesn't know is that he just buried his daughter. A girl who died waiting for help that never came. And the waitress who isn't afraid of him is about to become the one person he can't walk away from. She's got $38,000 in debt, a son she's about to lose, and a boss who's already made the call to destroy her. The most dangerous man she's ever met might be the only one willing to fight for her. But his help comes with a price she's not sure she can pay. Before we get into this one, tell me, have you ever stood up to someone when every part of you was shaking? I'd love to hear that story in the comments. The clock above the pass-through window read 11:07 p.m., and Elena Vasquez had been on her feet for 14 hours. She moved through the dining room the way she always did, steady, deliberate, nothing wasted. Her apron had a grease stain above the left pocket that wouldn't come out no matter how long she soaked it. Her lower back had been aching since hour 9. Her ponytail, clipped neatly at the start of the shift, had begun its slow unraveling somewhere around the dinner rush, and she hadn't bothered to fix it. There was no one here to fix it for. Inside her order pad tucked behind the cardboard backing was a photo of Marco, 8 years old, gap-toothed, wearing a backpack held together with a strip of duct tape on one strap. He had never once complained about the backpack. Elena had cried about it in the parking lot after drop-off. That was how grief worked when you were a mother. Private, practical, then back to work. That morning, before Marco was even out of bed, her phone had buzzed with a collections alert. The balance on her mother's medical debt was $38,000, and some change. Her mother had been dead for 2 years. Elena paid $175 a month toward it because she had promised, and Elena did not break promises, no matter what they cost her. She was refilling the salt shakers at the counter when Linda appeared at her elbow. Linda was 56, stout and sensible, with reading glasses permanently perched on her forehead and shoes worn so smooth they offered no traction on the wet floor. She had been at Rosie's Diner for 11 years and had the wisdom to recognize trouble before it sat down. "Back booth," Linda said quietly. 4 of them. Suits. Loud. Elena looked up. 4 men in tailored dark jackets had spread themselves across the largest booth in the back. They had not waited to be seated. They were already laughing too hard at something, already too comfortable, already too loud. The one in the center, broad-shouldered, silver-streaked hair with the kind of face that had stopped being handsome and settled into something harder, snapped his fingers in the air without looking up. Elena squared her shoulders and walked over. She took their orders without incident at first, then the man in the center, Dominic she would learn later, though that night she only knew him as the one with the gold watch, sent his steak back. Twice. The second time he slid the plate toward her without speaking, the way you move something out of your way. Then he picked up his whiskey glass and tipped it. Deliberately. Slowly. He held her gaze as the liquid spread across the table and dripped onto the floor. His men laughed. One of them said something she didn't catch. Elena got down on her knees with a rag and cleaned it up. Heat moved up the back of her neck. She breathed through it. When she came back with a new plate, his hand closed around her wrist, hard. His thumb pressed into the bruise-soft inside of it. "You're slow," he said. "I don't like slow." The table went quiet. Elena looked down at his hand. Then she looked up at his face. And something in her, something forged from years of this, from debt and double shifts and promises made to the dead, went completely dangerously still. She leaned in, close enough that only he could hear. "Touch me again," she said. "Shout at me again, and I will end you." The words were barely above a whisper. They landed like something thrown. 2 of the men reached inside their jackets. No one moved. Dominic Caruso, one of the most feared men in Essex County, a man whose name made police officers careful and politicians cautious, stared at her, for a long, unblinking beat. Something passed across his face that she couldn't name. He let go of her wrist. He was quiet for the rest of the meal. His men followed his lead, uncomfortable with the quiet in a way Elena was not. When they left, a thick fold of $100 bills sat on the table, more than she made in a week. Elena picked it up, walked to the trash, dropped it in. Linda, watching from the counter, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Elena tucked her order pad back into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing the corner of Marco's photo, and walked back to the kitchen to call in the next table's order. Whatever had just happened, there was still work to do. Her wrist was still faintly bruised the next evening when she came in for her shift. She had pressed 2 fingers against it that morning while Marco ate his cereal, testing the tenderness, thinking. She had not called the police. She had learned years ago that certain problems didn't get smaller when you handed them to the system. They just became the system's problems to lose. She tied her apron, tucked her order pad into her pocket, and pushed through the swing door into the dining room. He was in the back booth, same spot, same posture. Sitting alone now. No men, no suits, no theater. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, and he was doing nothing with it. When Elena walked over, her face was neutral. "Anything else tonight?" she asked. "Just the coffee." He said it plainly. No edge. She left him alone. He left her alone. He tipped $4 on a $2 cup of coffee and walked out without another word. The next night, he was there again, and the night after. By the third night, Linda had had enough. She pulled Elena into the kitchen during a slow hour and held out her phone. The screen showed a grainy photo and a headline from the Newark Star-Ledger, a story about organized crime in Essex County, a federal investigation that had gone nowhere, a name circled in the middle of it, Dominic Caruso. Elena read it twice. She handed the phone back. "You knew?" Linda asked. "I do now," Elena said. She walked back out. On the 4th night, she went directly to his booth. She stood across from him with her order pad open and her pen ready, and she asked him straight, "What do you want?" He looked at her for a moment. There was something careful in it, like a man choosing his words around a wound. "The coffee is terrible," he said, "but it's quiet here, and quiet is harder to come by than people think." She wrote nothing on the pad. "You can buy quiet in a lot of places." "Most of them," he said. "You have to pretend to be someone you're not." She walked away without responding. But later, refilling the sugar dispensers at the far end of the counter, she found herself thinking about the answer. It was too honest to be a performance. Dominic Caruso drove home to Montclair that night on streets he had traveled his whole adult life. The neighborhood was quiet and wealthy and entirely empty of anything he wanted. He parked in the driveway of a house that was too big for one person, walked through a kitchen that was spotless because no one used it, and stopped at the end of the upstairs hallway. Sophia's bedroom door was still closed. It had been closed for 3 months. He hadn't opened it since the night the hospital called. She had been 31, a waitress at the end in a Hoboken bar he'd never visited. She'd called him 2 weeks before she died and asked him to help her get clean, not with money, just with presence, just to sit with her through it. He had wired her $3,000 that same day. She died 11 days later. He stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then he went to his study, sat down, and picked up the phone. "Gio," he said when the line connected. "The waitress at Rosie's, her name, her situation, everything, not for business." He paused. "Just because I need to understand why she wasn't afraid of me." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then, "I'll have it by the end of the week." Dominic set down the phone. Through the window, Newark glittered in the dark. Unglamorous, stubborn, still standing. He thought about the way she had looked at him. Not with hatred, not with defiance exactly, with something cleaner than either. He thought about Sophia. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. The file was waiting on his kitchen table when he came downstairs at 6 in the morning. Gio never explained how he got things. He just got them. A plain black notebook clipped to a manila folder, a complete picture of a woman's life assembled from public records and private ones that had no business being accessible. Dominic poured his coffee and sat down. He read for 20 minutes without stopping. Elena Maria Vasquez, 34, born Newark. Her mother, Rosa, had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. Elena had been halfway through her second year of nursing school when the diagnosis came. She dropped out, picked up double shifts, and kept her mother alive for 2 years on a combination of wages, sheer will, and debt. When Rosa died, she left behind $38,000 in medical bills. Elena had not contested the debt. She had set up a payment plan for $175 a month and had not missed one. Marco's father was listed as unknown on the birth certificate. No support payments, no contact. The boy was in 3rd grade. Smart kid, his teachers wrote in report notes Gio had somehow obtained. Very kind. Tends to go quiet when he's worried. Dominic closed the folder. He sat with it for a while. The feeling in his chest was not comfortable. He was not accustomed to feeling things and not being able to do something about them. That afternoon, he sent Gio to leave an envelope at Rosie's. $2,000 in cash, unmarked. A gesture, he told himself. Not charity. A gesture. Elena found it behind the counter with her name on it in neat capital letters. She knew immediately there was only one person it could be from. She walked outside into the parking lot just as Dominic's car was pulling away. A dark sedan, unhurried, too clean for this neighborhood. She didn't call out. She walked after it. The car stopped. He stepped out. He was half a head taller than she'd remembered and looked, in the flat gray afternoon light, older than he'd seemed in the diner. He watched her cross the pavement toward him with an expression that was somewhere between wary and curious. She stopped a few feet away and held out the envelope. "I don't want this," she said. "It's not a debt." "I know what it is." Her voice was low and even. "It's a man who feels bad about something and thinks money fixes it. I've seen that before." She set the envelope on the hood of his car. "I don't need pity from anyone, especially not from a man whose hands aren't clean." He didn't move. He didn't reach for the envelope. He just looked at her. "I'll leave it in the trash," she said, "if you don't pick it up." She walked back inside. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment. Then he picked up the envelope. Not because he disagreed with her, because she had earned the last word and he knew it. Later that evening, he told Gio quietly, "I've never met anyone who couldn't be bought." Gio said nothing. He never did, but Dominic kept coming to the diner, not just to watch Elena now. He watched all of it. The way she walked the drunk from table 7 to a cab and stood outside in the cold until it pulled away. The way she slid a plate of eggs to a teenager in a booth at midnight who'd ordered nothing but water and clearly had no money. The way she refilled the coffee of the elderly man who came in every night at 9 and never once handed him a check. He watched all of it, and he said nothing. He was still learning the shape of what she was. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a different kind of plan was beginning to form. The office was barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet, and it smelled like stale coffee and something Elena couldn't name but associated with disappointment. Greg Holloway sat behind the desk like he'd been waiting for her. He was 45, soft through the middle, with thinning blonde hair and a clip-on tie he wore every shift without irony. He had been assistant manager at Rosie's for 9 years. He carried that fact the way some men carry weapons, always available, always just barely out of sight. He told her to close the door. Elena closed it. She stood, hands folded, her face neutral. Greg leaned back in his chair. "I've been getting feedback," he said, "about your attitude with customers. Tone, body language." He made a vague gesture with his hand. "You understand how this works. The owner cares about the customer experience." Elena kept her voice even. "I haven't had any complaints. I'm the one who decides that." He looked at her for a moment, letting the silence do its work. Then, "I'm going to have to pull you from Saturdays." The air left her lungs. Saturdays were her highest tip nights. She had built her budget around Saturdays. Without that shift, the math didn't work. She had run the numbers enough times to know exactly what it meant. "That's not a performance issue," she said. "That's retaliation." Greg smiled, not warmly. It's scheduling. He leaned forward, lowering his voice the way men do when they want to sound like they're doing you a favor. Look, Elena, you could earn those hours back if you're a little more cooperative. After closing, maybe, when it's quiet. His eyes moved over her face. You're a smart woman. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long, steady moment, and she did not flinch. Her jaw was tight. Her hands at her sides were still. No, she said. She walked out. The dining room was loud and warm and smelled like the fryer in the night ahead, and she moved through it without stopping, refilling coffees, taking orders, speaking to every table with the same calm voice she always used. From across the room, no one would have known anything had happened. But Dominic noticed. He'd been in his booth for an hour, watching, not in a threatening way anymore, just the way a person watches when they're trying to understand something. He saw the set of her shoulders change when she came out of the hallway by the office. He saw her unlock her phone under the counter and run numbers, the calculator app open, her thumb moving fast. She put the phone away and kept working. When he got up to leave, he paused near the door, glancing at the schedule posted by the bulletin board, one column of names. At the bottom, Greg Holloway, assistant manager, 9 years running. He sat in his car in the parking lot and watched Greg lock up through the window. The man's easy confidence, the way he hitched his belt and looked around like he owned the place. He didn't own anything, but he'd been allowed to pretend for a long time. Dominic took out his phone. "Gio," he said, "I need everything you can find on the assistant manager at Rosie's. Name's Greg Holloway." He drove home, and this time he didn't stop at the end of the hallway. It was a Wednesday morning, 10 days after Greg cut her shift. Elena was at the kitchen counter making Marco's lunch, peanut butter, no jelly the way he liked it, when the knock came. 2 knocks, brisk and official. She opened the door to 2 women in lanyards with the kind of careful, professional expressions that didn't mean anything good. Child Protective Services, an anonymous complaint, allegations that Elena routinely left her 8-year-old son unsupervised during overnight shifts. Elena stood very still. She walked them through the apartment, clean, small, everything in its place. She showed them Mrs. Padilla's door across the hall, knocked until the elderly woman answered in her housecoat, crocheted afghan draped over her arm. Mrs. Padilla told them plainly that she had been watching Marco every night Elena worked for 3 years, that she had a key to the apartment, that the boy was never alone for a single hour. The caseworkers wrote everything down. They were sympathetic. They had to open an investigation regardless. After the door closed, Elena walked directly to the bathroom and turned on the faucet. She sat on the edge of the tub and pressed both hands over her mouth and cried as quietly as she had ever done anything in her life. Not because she was afraid of losing Marco. She knew the truth. She had the arrangement. She had Mrs. Padilla. But because she was so tired. So deeply, unreasonably tired. The kind of tired that 8 hours of sleep wouldn't fix. The kind that came from being kicked when you were already running. She dried her face. She straightened up. She came out of the bathroom before Marco finished his cereal. From the hallway, he watched her sit back down at the table. He didn't say anything. He just watched, the way he always did when he sensed something was wrong, his small face careful and older than it should have been. She called Linda from the parking lot of his school. "He was bragging," Linda said, her voice low, "to Cynthia, night before last, said some people need to learn their place." A pause. "Elena, I'm sorry. I didn't think he'd actually—" "I know," Elena said. "Thank you." She hung up before Linda could say anything else. That evening at the diner, she moved through her section mechanically. Her hands worked, her face was composed, but something behind her eyes had gone very quiet. Dominic watched her from the booth. He set down his coffee. "Is something wrong?" "It's none of your business," she said, not cruelly, just truthfully. She walked away. Late that night, his phone buzzed. Gio's voice was flat and efficient. The tip skimming went back 3 years. POS adjustments almost every shift, a harassment complaint filed by a former waitress that had been buried, and the CPS complaint traced to a call made from the diner's office phone on a night when only one person had been in that office. Dominic sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Then he reached for his phone. She saw him as soon as she pushed through the side door after her shift. Leaning against the hood of his car, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, the parking lot quiet around him in the way that late November makes everything quiet. Elena stopped walking. "I know about the complaint," he said. "I know Greg filed it." The cold air moved between them. Elena's jaw tightened. "You had me investigated. I needed to understand the situation." "The situation is my life." Her voice was low, but her eyes were burning. "You don't have the right to my situation." "I can make this go away," he said. "One phone call. Greg would be gone by morning." "No." He straightened up slightly. "You'd rather fight a CPS investigation on your own?" "I'd rather do that than owe a man like you anything." She held his gaze. "I read the article. Linda showed me weeks ago. I know exactly who you are and how you make problems disappear, and I want no part of it." Something shifted in his face. "What kind of man do you think I am?" She answered him without hesitation. "A dangerous one. The kind who hurts people and calls it business, and who'd rather write a check than sit with the consequences." She pulled her coat tighter. "I spent years watching my mother get sicker and doing everything alone because there was no one who could fix it. Not cleanly, not the right way. I learned to live with problems that don't have shortcuts." She looked at him steadily. "I won't trade that for whatever you're offering." She walked to the bus stop. He drove home. On the freeway, the city lights blurring past, Dominic's hands tightened on the wheel. Elena's words had landed somewhere precise and painful. In a part of him he had been keeping very quiet. He was trying to buy redemption. The same way he had bought Sophia's last apartment. The same way he had wired money instead of getting on a plane. She had called him on a Sunday afternoon, her voice unsteady, and asked him to come, just to be there. He had told her he'd handle it. He had sent $3,000 before the hour was out. She had died on a Thursday, 11 days later, in that apartment he paid for, alone. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the dark for a long time. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled past Gio's name entirely. He stopped on a different name, Catherine Munoz, family law attorney. He had never called her for anything like this. She picked up on the third ring. "I need to know," he said, "what it would take to fight a fraudulent CPS complaint, legally, properly, pro bono, through whatever network you use." A pause. "My name stays out of it entirely." A brief silence on her end. "Tell me about the case," she said. Dominic leaned back in the seat, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, did something he had never been good at. He asked for help instead of buying it. The legal aid office was on the third floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and photocopier toner, and Catherine Munoz was already at the door when Elena came up the stairs. She was sharp-featured and unhurried. With dark hair and a clean bun and a worn leather briefcase, she sat on the desk like it weighed nothing. She shook Elena's hand and said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave out anything you think is too small." Elena told her. Catherine listened without interrupting. She wrote notes in a precise, narrow hand, and when Elena finished, she asked 3 questions. The dates Greg had adjusted the POS system on her highest-earning nights, whether Mrs. Padilla had ever signed anything formalizing the childcare arrangement, and whether Elena had saved any texts from Linda confirming Greg's involvement. Elena answered yes to 1 out of 3. "That's fine," Catherine said. "We're going to build this. Document everything going forward. Dates, times, what was said, and who heard it. Keep your phone charged." She slid a card across the desk. "Call me for anything." Elena looked at the card for a moment. She tried to remember the last time someone had told her to call for anything and meant it. "The flyer," Elena said, "at Marco's school. Was it just on the board, or—" "It goes out monthly to the parent community," Catherine said smoothly. "You'd be surprised how many families we reach that way." Elena nodded and put the card in her pocket. Across town, Dominic placed a phone call to a number in Boca Raton. Arthur Klein was the kind of man who answered in the middle of a golf game and didn't apologize for the background noise. Dominic introduced himself using a name Arthur recognized from past correspondence about the building, a name that carried no history of organized crime, only real estate. He mentioned carefully that a routine review of the diner's financials had raised some questions, that a professional audit might be advisable, that if Arthur wanted to protect himself from liability, the time to act was now. Arthur said he'd send his accountant by the end of the week. That evening, Elena was on her break in the back hallway, standing at the folding table the staff used as a lunch spot, when the side door opened and Marco walked in. He was still in his school clothes, backpack riding high on his back, duct tape gleaming under the fluorescent light, and he was grinning his gap-toothed grin like he had something important to report. Mrs. Padilla had walked him over. He had something to show her. He unfolded a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I made it at school today," he said. "It's you, fighting a dragon." Elena looked at the drawing. A small figure with a ponytail, arms raised, facing something large and dark and fire-breathing. The figure's arms were raised. She was not running. Elena laughed, really laughed. Her whole face changed. From the dining room, through the pass-through window, Dominic heard the sound of it. He turned slightly toward it. Then he turned away and looked down at his coffee. He didn't want anyone to see his face just then. That night, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from the CPS caseworker. The home visit was scheduled for 8 days from now. The process was moving forward. She put the phone down, held the drawing a little longer. Then she tucked it behind Marco's photo in her order pad, right where she could always find it. She'd been awake since 5. The apartment was clean, really clean. The kind of clean that costs something, that leaves your hands raw and the smell of bleach in your hair. Elena had wiped down every surface, scrubbed the bathroom grout, folded the blankets on Marco's bed with the corners tucked exactly so. The crocheted Afghan Mrs. Padilla had made him lay perfectly flat across the top. Marco sat at the kitchen table in his good shirt, eating cereal, watching his mother move. Mrs. Padilla arrived at 7:45. She settled into the armchair with her crochet needle and didn't say much, which was the right thing to do. The caseworkers arrived at 9. They were thorough and professional and not unkind. They noted the clean apartment, the consistent arrangement with Mrs. Padilla, the school attendance records Catherine had already submitted. The older of the two women wrote steadily in her folder and did not look at Elena the way Elena had been afraid she would. Then she closed the folder and said there had been a second complaint, filed 2 days ago, alleging that Elena regularly had unstable men in and out of her home, creating an unsafe environment for a child. The air in the room changed. Elena felt Marco look up from the table. She kept her face composed. "That's false," she said. "I believe you," the caseworker said. "But with 2 complaints on file, a supervisor review becomes mandatory. The investigation will continue." After they left, Elena stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment. She did not break down. She thanked Mrs. Padilla, walked Marco to school, smiled at the right moments, and then she tied on her apron and went to work. Greg had posted the new schedule on the board by the service station. Elena looked at it once. Then she looked away. 2 shifts, down from 5. Tuesday and Friday, both mornings, the slowest hours, the smallest tips. It was not scheduling. It was slow suffocation. She found him near the office and said his name. He turned around and his eyes moved over her with the lazy confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Something on your mind?" "You know what's on my mind." He raised his voice just slightly. Not much, just enough to carry. Just enough for Cynthia and the new girl and the cook to hear. "Maybe if you'd been more cooperative when it counted," he said, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." He smiled. "You made your choices, Elena." Linda was at the far end of the counter. She heard every word. She did not move. She looked down at the coffee she was pouring, and she did not look up, and the guilt on her face was the most honest thing in the room. Elena walked out. She sat at the bus stop 4 blocks away with her coat pulled closed against the cold and her phone in her hand. She opened her banking app. The number sat there, flat and final, $211, rent due in 9 days. She whispered it to herself like a promise, just hold on a little longer. She didn't know what she was holding on for. She just knew she wasn't done yet. She sat perfectly still. Across town, a phone rang in Dominic's kitchen. His accountant's voice was brisk and certain. The audit was complete. Greg Holloway had been skimming tips through POS adjustments for 3 years. The total, documented and traceable across hundreds of transactions, was $47,000. Dominic set down the phone. He reached for his watch, ran his thumb across the face of it. Then he made a call to Arthur Klein. It was time to talk about the building. The office Arthur's accountant had borrowed for the day smelled like fresh paint and someone else's lunch, and Arthur Klein appeared on the laptop screen with the slightly overexposed look of a man sitting near a Florida window at noon. Dominic sat across from the screen in a plain chair and didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'll buy the building," he said. $340,000 cash, above market. You close by the end of the month." Arthur blinked. Then he said, "Done." That was it. 6 years of absentee ownership, of comfortable neglect, of allowing Greg Holloway to run a diner like a fiefdom while Arthur collected the lease payment from 1,000 miles away. And Arthur Klein sold it in under a minute, without asking a single question. He took the money and disappeared. The following morning, Dominic sat across from Catherine Munoz in her office. On the table between them, the audit records, 3 years of POS documentation. Gio's file tracing the first CPS complaint to a call made from the diner's office phone during Greg's shift. A second file tracing a prepaid phone, purchased with a debit card registered to Greg Holloway, to the second complaint filed 2 days before Elena's home visit. And 3 signed statements from former waitresses, women Gio had tracked down in 3 different New Jersey towns, who had left Rosie's diner after Greg harassed them and had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to ask. Catherine read through each document carefully. She asked 2 clarifying questions. Then she set down her pen. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Dominic looked at the table for a moment. "I spent 30 years making people afraid," he said. "I was good at it, and it never once brought my daughter back." He touched the watch on his wrist, just briefly, a reflex so old he didn't notice it anymore. "This is the first thing I've done that feels like it matters." Catherine held his gaze. Then she picked up her pen and got to work. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Elena's apartment, printed on plain paper, signed by a property management company she had never heard of. All staff were required to attend a mandatory meeting at Rosie's Diner in 3 days, called by the building's new owner. Attendance was not optional. Elena read it 3 times. She assumed she was going to be fired. That night, she stood at the ironing board in her bedroom, pressing the collar of her one good blouse. White with a small pearl button at the throat, bought secondhand, worn twice in the last 5 years. Marco appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, watching her. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm okay," she said. "You're ironing at night." "I know." He stood there a moment longer. "It's going to be okay," he told her, with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who has decided to believe something. She looked at him. Her chest ached in the specific way it did when he was too grown up for his age. "Yeah," she said. "It is?" She finished the collar and hung the blouse carefully on the doorframe. She turned off the iron. She went and tucked Marco in under the crocheted afghan, and she sat at the edge of his bed for a little longer than usual. She had no idea what was walking toward her, but she had shown up to hard things before. She could show up to one more. She had ironed the blouse for nothing, it turned out. No one was looking at her clothes. Elena arrived at Rosie's 10 minutes early and took a seat in the back of the dining room, arms crossed, watching the door. Linda was already there, sitting 2 tables over with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and her hands folded in her lap, very still. 2 other waitresses, Cynthia and a younger woman named Bree, sat together near the window. The cook leaned against the counter with his arms folded like a man waiting for a bus. Greg stood near the pass-through with the posture of someone who expected to enjoy the next hour. He had told them all the same thing: new owner, business type, probably going to streamline operations, maybe cut staff. He'd said it with the casual ease of a man who assumed he was safe, regardless of what happened to anyone else. The door opened. Dominic walked in. Greg looked up with the bland expression of a man expecting a stranger. And then the expression changed, all at once. The color left his face. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes moved to the door, then to the room, then back to Dominic, calculating distances and exits the way a man does when he suddenly realizes there are none. Dominic looked at him once. Then he turned to address the room. A woman came in behind him, sharp features, dark hair, and a clean bun, worn leather briefcase held at her side. She set the briefcase on a table, opened it, and placed a stack of documents down in a single, practiced motion. "This is Catherine Munoz," Dominic said. "She has something to show you." Catherine began at the beginning. 3 years of POS records, $47,000 in tip adjustments, documented transaction by transaction, shift by shift. The money taken from these women's hands in increments so small that anyone could be explained away, and so consistent that the pattern was unmistakable. Cynthia made a sound like the air going out of something, then the first CPS complaint, filed from the diner's office phone, on a Tuesday evening during a shift when only one person had been in that office. Greg's jaw worked. You can't prove who made that call. "The call log is time-stamped," Catherine said. She didn't look up. "The office sign-in sheet puts you there alone from 8 to close. The complaint was filed at 9:43. Then the second complaint. A prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store in Kearney with a debit card registered to Gregory Allen Holloway. The receipt was in the file. Then the testimony. 3 women, 3 names, 3 signed statements about what Greg had done and why they had left, and what it had cost them to stay silent. The room was so quiet you could hear the refrigerator hum behind the counter. Dominic looked at Greg. "You thought you were untouchable because the people you hurt were too small to fight back." A pause. "That's exactly why they deserved someone in their corner." Greg tried to explain. Then he tried to apologize. He looked at Linda, at Cynthia, at Elena, and said he was sorry, that things had gotten out of hand, that he'd been under pressure. No one moved. 2 police officers came through the door. They walked him out. The bell above the door rang when it closed behind him. In 30 years, that bell had never sounded so final. Elena was shaking, not from relief, from something that had been clenched inside her for weeks and didn't know yet how to let go. She looked at Dominic. "I need to talk to you, alone." One by one, the others filed out, until the diner held only the 2 of them and the low hum of the lights. She let him have it. She was grateful for what he'd done to Greg. She said that first, so there was no confusion, and she was furious. "You investigated my life without asking. You built a file on me and my son. You placed flyers at Marco's school so I'd walk into Catherine's office thinking I'd found her myself." Her voice stayed low and level. It always did. "You made decisions about my path, my choices, without my knowledge or my consent." Dominic stood across from her and did not look away. "What Greg did was control through cruelty. What you did was control through kindness." She held his gaze. "I won't accept either one." Silence. "You're right," he said. "No defense, no qualifications, just that." "It's the only way I know how to help," he said. "I fix things from the shadows. It's what I'm built for." He pulled out a chair and sat down, not to claim anything, just to stop standing like a man waiting to be dismissed. "But you're right." He told her about Sophia then, not the version from the newspaper, the real one, 31 years old, a waitress at the end. She'd called him on a Sunday and asked him to come, just to be there, just to sit with her through the hard part. He had sent $3,000. He had not come. She was gone in 11 days, and the last thing she heard from him was a wire transfer. Elena listened without interrupting. "The foundation is named for her," Dominic said. He slid a document across the table. 2 pages. The Sophia Caruso Foundation. $2 million. His own money. Legal aid. Emergency childcare grants. Scholarships for single mothers in the service industry across New Jersey. "I want you to direct it, but only after you finish nursing school, fully funded, because I won't let you trade one dead end for another, and because the foundation needs someone who understands both the system and the fight." He slid a second folder across. Nursing school re-enrollment paperwork, a letter from the debt collection agency, stamped paid in full, $38,000 cleared, and a single page bearing Marco's name and the name of an after-school program. Elena opened the folder. She read the debt letter, read it again. Then she put her hand over her mouth and held it there. "Why should I trust you?" she said. "You shouldn't, not yet." He didn't look away. "Trust is built by what happens next, not by what I promised tonight." She looked at the folder, at the word paid over her mother's name, stamped in blue ink like a door finally closing on something that had been left open too long. She closed the folder. "If I do this, I do it my way. Everything transparent. No shadows, no decisions made about anyone without their knowledge." "That's the first answer," Dominic said quietly, "that I've trusted in a long time." Elena picked up the folder and walked to the door. She stood for a moment with her hand on the frame. Same diner, same smells, same hum. But something had shifted in the room's weight, and she felt it. She wasn't saying yes, but she wasn't walking away empty-handed either. 3 weeks later, Greg Holloway stood in a courtroom in Essex County in the same short-sleeved dress shirt and clip-on tie he wore to every shift, and for the first time in 9 years, the clothes didn't help. His public defender asked for leniency, no prior record, a family at home. The judge listened. Then Catherine Munoz stood and read aloud the full pattern. Not just the skimming, not just the CPS complaints, but the 3 former employees, the years of small cruelties administered so carefully that no single one could have brought him down alone. The judge denied bail reduction without deliberating long. Greg's wife was sitting in the 3rd row. She had come. He'd been holding on to that she was there, that maybe some version of this could still be survived. The clerk read the charges. Wage theft, filing 2 fraudulent CPS reports, workplace harassment across multiple victims over 3 years, and then the number, $47,000, stolen from women earning $2.13 an hour, taken $4 at a time, $8 at a time, so quietly and so consistently that none of them could have proven it alone. His wife stood up. She didn't look at him. She picked up her coat and her bag and she walked out, and the door swung shut behind her, and Greg watched it close. He stood alone. That afternoon, Elena's phone rang. The CPS caseworker spoke carefully. Both complaints had been reviewed, flagged as retaliatory, filed in bad faith. Both were being removed from Elena's record permanently. The investigation was closed. Elena sat at her kitchen table and breathed. That evening, Linda called. She had given her own statement that morning. Everything she knew, every moment she had stayed quiet and wished she hadn't. It had come out of her in a rush. Her voice broke a little when she told Elena, "I should have spoken sooner. I was scared, and I'm sorry." Elena pulled her in and held on. "We're all speaking now," she said. "That's what matters." Dominic had offered Linda the manager position at the diner. It was reopening the following month as a worker-owned cooperative. Equal shares, open tip records, schedules set by the people who worked them. Linda had said yes before he finished the sentence. That night, Elena sat at the kitchen table. The nursing school enrollment form lay in front of her. A pen was in her hand. She had been sitting with it for 10 minutes, and she wasn't afraid exactly. She just wanted to feel the weight of it before she moved. Marco appeared in the hallway in his pajamas. He leaned against the doorframe and watched her, those dark, patient eyes that had always seen more than they let on. She put the pen to the paper. She signed her name. Marco smiled, that wide, gap-toothed, unguarded smile, the one that appeared easily and often. Then he turned and padded back down the hall to bed. He had always believed she would. 3 years is a long time, and sometimes it isn't long enough. And sometimes, on the right morning in the right hallway, it feels like exactly what it was supposed to be. Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors of Newark Beth Israel Medical Center in scrubs that fit her the way purpose fits a person when they've finally found it, completely without apology. She was 37 now. The ponytail was the same. The hands were still raw and capable and short-nailed, but they had learned new things in 3 years. How to take a blood pressure reading with precision, how to reassure a frightened patient with a single steady look, how to carry someone else's fear without flinching. She was finishing her final clinical rotation, and her supervising nurse had written in her file the previous week, "She has always understood that this work is about the person, not the paperwork." Marco was 11. He had his mother's eyes and his own easy grin and a new backpack. No duct tape needed, though Elena had kept the old one in the closet and couldn't quite bring herself to throw it away. He was thriving. That word, thriving, had once felt too large and too expensive to belong to them. Now it fit. The Sophia Caruso Foundation had helped 340 single mothers across New Jersey. Legal aid, emergency child care grants, tuition scholarships. Elena had sat on the advisory board through her years of study, learning the shape of the work before she stepped into it fully, understanding every case the way she understood her own, because in most of them, she saw herself. The Foundation's first graduating scholarship class gathered that afternoon in the community kitchen that now occupied what had once been Rosie's diner. The fryer was gone. The counter was warmer now, with photographs and painted walls and tables where people came to build things instead of endure them. 12 women, 12 certificates, 12 different versions of the same tenacious story. Dominic sat in the back row. He was quieter than he used to be, thinner through the face. He had given up the Montclair house and taken a modest apartment in Newark, closer to the work, farther from the person he used to be. The cooperation with federal investigators had not been simple and had not been clean, but it had been real. His former operations dismantled piece by piece over 18 months, the immunity agreement holding because he had honored every term without reservation. He still wore the watch. He would always wear the watch. Elena stood at the front of the room and spoke without notes. She said that dignity is not something anyone can give you, and it is not something anyone can take from you. But sometimes, she said, someone can stand beside you long enough for you to remember you had it all along. Dominic nodded once, very slightly, the kind of nod a person gives when a thing has been said exactly right. The following week, Elena stood in an auditorium at the medical center in a white uniform with a small silver pin that she had earned in full. Marco sat in the front row, dressed in his good shirt, bouncing one knee with barely contained excitement. Linda was beside him, smoothing her own good blouse, her worn orthopedic shoes planted firmly on the floor. Mrs. Padilla sat at the end of the row with a crocheted square in her lap, always working, always present. The woman who had held the whole arrangement together on quiet nights when no one was watching. Dominic sat alone in the back row of the auditorium. He didn't need to be in the front. He had learned, slowly and at great cost, that showing up mattered more than the seat you chose. When Elena's name was called, Marco stood up before everyone else did. The community kitchen smelled like coffee and something baking, cinnamon maybe, or something close to it. And the light inside was warm in the way that November light outside never is. Elena had been inside Sophia's place dozens of times in the past year. She knew the layout the way you know a place that used to be something else, the same bones, a different life. The counter was still there, but the bulletin board above it now held photographs. Single mothers holding certificates, daughters on hips, sons in graduation caps, faces open with the specific joy of someone who was told they couldn't, and then did. Elena stopped at one of them, a young woman in a medical assistant's jacket, grinning at the camera with her little girl tucked under one arm, a certificate in the other hand. The caption below read, "Class 3 graduate, first in her family to complete a vocational program." Elena stood there for a moment. Then she walked to the back of the room. Dominic was in the back booth. Same spot, same posture, though the weight he used to carry in his shoulders had shifted or settled or simply changed into something different. A cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when she sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because some rooms don't need to be rushed into. They talked honestly about Sophia. What she had been like as a girl, the way she'd laughed, the way she'd bought that watch with 3 months of her own waitressing money and handed it to him in a box she'd wrapped herself. About Marco, and the after-school program, and the fact that he'd started saying he wanted to be a doctor because his mom was a nurse, and that seemed like the next logical step. About what it costs to change. Really change, not just rearrange, and whether the cost is worth it. "It is," Dominic said. "I think it is. Most days." Elena looked at him across the table, at the booth that had once held 4 men in expensive suits and a glass of spilled whiskey, and a wrist grabbed too hard, and a threat that changed everything. "I meant what I said that first night," she told him. "Every word, I'd say it again." Dominic smiled. It was not the face of the man who had sat in that booth 3 years ago. Or rather, it was the same face, but something behind the eyes had come forward that used to be sealed shut. "I know you would," he said. "That's exactly why it saved my life." The door at the front of the kitchen burst open and Marco came in at a run, slightly out of breath, his good shirt half untucked, holding a folded piece of paper with the careful importance of someone delivering something that matters. He spread it on the table between them. It was the dragon drawing, updated. The figure with the ponytail was taller now, standing straight, and the dragon in front of her was small, smaller than her knee. And behind her, shoulder to shoulder, were other women, a whole row of them, standing together. Dominic picked it up carefully with both hands and looked at it for a long time. Outside, the November dark had settled over Newark the way it always did, unglamorous, unhurried, still standing. Through the front window of Sophia's place, the name was painted in gold letters that caught the light from inside and held it. A coffee cup sat on the table of the back booth, steam rising in a thin curl. The same booth, the same quiet, but everything had changed. One moment of standing your ground, one refusal to be small. That's how it starts, not with a speech, not with a plan, but with a single person who decides that how they are treated is not something they are willing to accept. And that moment ripples out. It reaches people you'll never meet, in towns you'll never visit, in hard rooms where someone is sitting alone and wondering if it's worth fighting. It is. It always was. If this story meant something to you, if you saw someone you know in Elena, or someone you love in Marco, or someone you're still hoping to become, share it with them. Some stories are meant to travel. The coffee cools, the light stays on. Sophia's name stays on the window in gold where everyone passing by can read it. And in the back booth, for the first time in a long time, no one is afraid.